On this super review, let's take a critical look at the Bose noise canceling headphones 700. If you've been following my channel, you might have seen that I recently reviewed the Sony WH-1000XM3, which is, if you haven't heard of it, that's a noise canceling headphone. It competes with this thing. Of course you've heard of it. But really, when I reviewed that, I wanted to do two things. One, I wanted to take a look at that headphone from sort of a, again, I'm gonna use this phrase a little begrudgingly, but from an audiophile perspective, someone that's really into audio, how do those things sound? But also, I just kind of wanted to prepare myself for these things. And these are the Bose Noise Canceling Headphones 700, which is kind of a goofy name. They're no longer quiet core, they're just noise canceling headphones. Okay, just call it what it is, that's cool. But I'm really interested to check out how these things work as a pair of over-ear headphones for someone like me who's into audio. And you know, there's certain scenarios where I can't bring my audio rig with me, right? Here I've got a shit stack hooked up to a pair of Sennheiser HD 600s. I love it. That's probably my favorite sounding setup, but when I'm at work, I don't really have access to that. If I'm on a train, I don't ride a train, but if I'm on a train, I don't have access to that. But I could have access to something like these Bose headphones. But would I be satisfied? So in this review of the Bose Noise Canceling Headphones 700, I'm gonna take a critical look at how these things sound. If you're an executive and you're sitting in first class on an airplane or in the back seat of a Bentley and you wanna know what is the best headphone for getting business done, you're probably gonna have to look at other headphone reviews, because I'm not that person. I don't make phone calls. I'm not gonna make a phone call on these headphones. But what I am gonna do is I'm gonna take a look at how these things sound, and I'm gonna compare these to some other headphones that are roughly in this price range, right? Do you wanna know, are you spending $400 for a bunch of technology and getting a subpar headphone, or are you actually getting a really nice sounding set? Let's find out. All right, let's talk about the Bose Noise Canceling Headphones 700, which is a name I'm still not very comfortable with, so maybe we'll just call them the 700s. And I mentioned in the intro that I'm not interested in reviewing these from the perspective of making phone calls, but I kind of underplayed myself a little bit because I'm not just going to talk about these things in terms of sound. I also am very interested in build quality, fit, functionality, user experience, and stuff like that. And that's what we're going to start. We're going to start by talking about the build of this earphone or this headphone. And frankly, I think this is a really, really nicely built headphone. Like, just aesthetically, I know it's a little bit contentious, but I think this thing is a great looking headphone, especially compared to the QC35. I think these things look awesome. And I think these things also look better than the Sonys, at least in my opinion. And the advantage here versus the Sony XM3s is not just in aesthetics. I think that build quality wise, these things are also, these things feel a lot more premium and a lot more worth their price. Even though these things cost more than the Sonys, I think the Sonys, their MSRP is around $350 and these cost $400. So not cheap headphones, but these ones I feel like are actually, they're built in a way that makes it feel like they're $400 headphones. A lot of that build just comes down to the use of metal and nicer materials. So this band up here is all metal except for, you know, you've got this little silicone band on the outer. I'm not sure what that's about. As well as the padding on the inside here is covered in silicone. The cups, are they metal? I feel like they are metal, but I'm not sure. But they definitely feel nice and quality. And the ear pads themselves are pretty comfortable. They're not like a memory foam or anything like that, but they're pretty nicely detailed. Yeah, just overall, like, I think it feels like a really nicely built headphone. That I like these adjusters, you know, even though there's no detents in it and no clicks. I find that kind of annoying just because I like to have my headphones set. I know where my setting is. And here it's analog and you kind of got to guess. But I think that as far as mechanisms go, at least it looks attractive, right? A lot of headphones, when you expand them, you expose kind of an ugly metal band, and that's not the case here with the 700s, and I think that's kind of cool. You might be able to hear there's a little bit of wobble in that connection point between the ear cups and the headband, but it's not something that I hear when I'm listening to them. It's something that I only hear when I'm holding them out here in front of camera and shaking them like that, which I don't do very often. Unfortunately, in terms of comfort, I'd actually give the nod to the Sonys. And a lot of it comes down to, I think that the Sonys are a lighter headphone. I mean, I don't think that. I know that the Sonys are lighter. You can measure that. But I also just think that in terms of how they fit on a head, they're just a little bit more pillowy, a little bit more soft. This is a little bit more of a sterner fit. I think the clamp is a little bit stronger. And for me, I actually have a little bit of issue with this headband. It just seems like, I don't know, maybe it's a little bit narrow, but it seems to create a pressure point across the top of my head. And now I can reposition it from time to time and kind of avoid that problem. But that's something that I did experience here that I don't experience with the Sonys. I think overall build quality, I prefer the Bose to the Sonys, but just that comfort, the Sonys are kind of like climbing into a big puffy bed with a big puffy comforter. And the Bose 700s are a little bit more like sitting on a finely detailed leather couch where it looks really nice and it's not super uncomfortable, but it's just not as plush and homey as the Sonys. Now, in terms of Bluetooth functionality, I think the Bose are doing a pretty good job. The overall Bluetooth range, I would say, is pretty strong. Not like especially amazing, but it's some of the better Bluetooth range that I've had. Connection quality was very strong, no issues there. I would say that latency with video was very well done or very well handled. Like basically any Bluetooth headphone is gonna have some amount of latency, and these are definitely on the lower end, kind of around similar with AirPods and even the Sonys. Oh, the multi-point connection, the multi-point pairing on these is actually pretty well done. And that's a big difference that I know a lot of people have pointed out between the Bose and the Sonys. Is the Sonys, I don't know if they even do multi-point pairing, and these do, and they do it pretty well. So you can have these headphones paired to two different sources, let's say your phone and your computer, And the headphones will automatically switch between them depending on which source is playing music. Now, you can't listen to both sources at the same time. It's going to pick one or the other, but I think that, I mean, that's pretty typical of anything that supports multipoint, and the quickness with which these detect a different source switch is on the better end. That was a really awkwardly phrased sentence, but that's something that you'll probably notice when you're using multipoint, is that sometimes it takes a long time for a headphone to detect and know that it needs to switch sources. And these do it within like a second or two, a couple of seconds. So I think they're doing a pretty good job. Audio playback controls on the Bose are basically all handled by tap functions on the outer shell, and it's all on the right side, which is actually the same as the Sony's. So let's see, you've got, I think, is it a double tap to toggle pause play? You can swipe forward and backward to skip tracks, and then you can swipe up and down to change volumes. One thing that I think that's pretty cool about the volume changing is that it's a very smooth volume change. So you can start from down here and just kind of like slowly ramp up the audio. Whereas with the Sony's, I feel like it's a swipe up for each successive notch of volume. I think there is a trick to make it so that like you swipe up and hold and it'll start moving up, but I think this execution is better. The one thing that I think is not better about the touch controls here versus the Sony's is, well, the fact that they've got this metal bar going down the middle of the ear cup. I mean, I think it looks fine. I don't have any issue with the aesthetics there or, you know, the fit or anything like that. But as far as, you know, giving you a surface with which to interact with tap controls, it's actually, it cuts it off, right? So basically, if you do a swipe, you're kind of being interfered by this bar. It's not a big issue, I don't think, but when you've used the Sony's and they've just got that nice flat surface on the outside, they're really nice for using touch controls. And here, it's pretty good, but it feels like it's a little bit of a compromise. Oh, so noise canceling performance, probably something you're curious to know about. And I haven't spent much time with the QC35, so I can't comment too much on those, but I have spent a little bit more time with the QC25s. And as far as I understand, those are just a wired version of the 35s. If I'm wrong, I'm sorry, but that's what I'm going to compare these things to, is the 25s. And I found that the noise canceling here is an improvement over the Bose QC25s in a couple of ways. So one, just the overall effectiveness of the noise canceling, I would say, is stronger here. It's hard for me to say exactly which frequencies it's doing better because I didn't have them to do like head-to-head comparisons, but just overall, I think these things do a better job of muting sounds around you, like voices. You know, all noise canceling does really good with low frequencies, and then mid frequencies like voices tend to come through a little bit still, but these do a pretty good job of blocking them out. The other way that I think that these things, the noise canceling is an improvement over previous Bose, is that I don't get like the weird underwater sort of like cabin pressure effect with these like I do on the QC25s, and I think that's pretty nice. Now, versus the Sony XM3s, I think the noise canceling is basically the same. Like, there might be some detectable difference, and I don't doubt when some other reviews have talked about which one is better than the other and maybe pointing out some minor differences. I don't doubt that those differences exist, but I think that they're so close that I would not make that a reason for me to choose one headphone versus the other. I think that they're both doing a really nice job with the noise canceling. And they both do a good job of not giving you that cabin pressure feeling. So I can't really differentiate them in terms of noise canceling, and frankly, I think you'll be happy with either one. All right, so I've told you basically everything I can about the Bose noise canceling headphones 700 while avoiding talking about the sound. So now let's go ahead and talk about the sound. Before we do, I think a couple things worth calling out. One, the Bluetooth codec, the highest quality Bluetooth codec that these things support is AAC. There's no aptX and no LDAC, and that's kind of disappointing. I don't know, in my experience with the Sony's, like, I don't think that those are a high enough resolution headphone that the difference in the Bluetooth codec makes much noticeable difference, at least to my ears. So I don't miss it, but I feel like if you're gonna pay $400 for a Bluetooth headphone, we should be getting the best Bluetooth codecs there are, and AAC is a fine Bluetooth codec. It's better than SBC, but in terms of just outright bitrate, it's not as good as aptX or LDAC. So that's kind of a bummer. The other thing that's worth calling out is that there is an app that supports the Bose, but I found that the app is actually kind of useless. It doesn't really do that much. I mean, it allows you to name the headphones if you want to give them a cool name, but it doesn't give you any options for EQ. So if you want to use any EQ to adjust the sound of this headphone, you're going to have to do it in your music playing app, not in the headphones. Kind of a bummer. Now, the overall sound signature of this, I would say, is a fairly balanced sound signature with some bass emphasis, some upper mid-range emphasis, and pretty relaxed treble. Overall, I think that just stock out of the box, I much prefer the sound of these versus the Sonys, and I don't think that I love the sound out of these things, especially, comparing these things to some other $400 wired headphones. It's not really close, but as far as just like a comfortable around the office, around the house listen, they're not bad. These are not critical listening headphones. And I wasn't really expecting that based on my experience with the Sonys and with previous Bose noise canceling headphones. They're definitely going for comfort and convenience and just relaxation versus, an intense attention seeking detail headphone. These are not that. But for what they are, they're fairly pleasant, kind of depending on the music that you're listening to. I found that music with a nice sub-bass focus, so electronic stuff, or I've been listening to this album by a group called The Parcels lately, and they've just got nice sub-bass layering in them, and these are pretty nice with that, I'll be honest. Like, the sub-bass, it's got a nice little sub-bass punch without the mid-bass feeling very bloated. And that was my big problem with the Sony XM3 is just the bass is just kind of overdone in those, and it's mostly in the mid-bass region. The bass I still think is a little bit overdone, but there's a little bit more sub-bass emphasis, and it rolls off a little bit more smoothly into the mid-bass so that the overall sound doesn't come across as congested as it does on the Sonys. Look, I still don't think that you're getting a ton of detail and a ton of layering in this music or in the music that you would hear on the Bose or on the 700s, but versus the Sony, it's not really close. I much prefer the stock sound out of these. For some other music genres, like some of the hip hop tracks that I've got that do have a little bit more mid-bass focus, I did find that the mid-bass in here is a little bit meh, a little bit puffy, and not my favorite. I think that these things do sub-bass a little bit better. The upper mid-range I mentioned, there's a little bit of emphasis, so it brings out vocals, but there does seem to be kind of an uncomfortable spike in the upper mid-range. Maybe it's in the lower treble, but I think that it's definitely more mid-range focus, that spike that, again, with certain vocals, it's totally fine, but with some other vocals, it can be just a little bit grating and a little bit irritating over the long term. And then the treble, it's pretty relaxed in here. I don't know, there's not a ton to say about it. It's fine, it's there. There's not gonna be any problems, like if you have issues with sibilance or treble sensitivity, you won't have any issue with the 700s, but if you're looking for just a lot of detail and sparkle, it's not here. So out of 5 stars, I'll go ahead and give these things 4 stars out of 5. And a lot of that is just because I really want to love this headphone. The build quality and the aesthetic of this thing and what it's like to handle and feel, it's really, really quite nice. And it makes these things actually feel like a $400 headphone versus the Sonys, which are built fine. They just don't feel especially plush or especially nice for their price. The noise canceling in these things is excellent. The Bluetooth functionality in these things is very solid. The app is not very good. I would not bother installing the app because I think it's just gonna add a little bit of frustration to your life and not really give you anything. But if you can ignore the app and just use these for what they are, I think they're a pretty nice headphone. Now the sound quality, again, these are not like critical listening headphones. These are relaxed kind of background music, and that's good for something around the office. It's good for being on an airplane. Not so much for, this scenario where I'm sitting down at my desk with my HT600s and I'm really just kind of digging into the detail of a song. These things, you can do it, I guess, if you want, but
For $400, you can get better headphones. They're not gonna have noise canceling, they're not gonna be portable like these things, and they probably won't be built like this, but I don't know. The sound is fine enough, good enough that for as much as I wanna like these, I'll still give them 4 stars out of 5. If you're interested in checking out the Bose Noise Canceling Headphones 700, of course, I've got links in the description down below, and while you're down there, down in the description, you can go ahead and hit the like button for the video if you liked it. You can subscribe to the channel, and then I'll see you on the next super review.